I guess you ain't from around here. Yeah, I guess you ain't from around here. Yeah, look at what we did in the past year. Yeah, lot of green like a pasture, lot of busted like a pastor. Yeah, enjoy it while I'm still here. I've been on the up and disappeared like the rapture. No mad raps in the cheap, sure. I'm just shopping in my Sears. I ain't no soothsayer, just a truth seeker, blue tweaker. Might just make a meal while I'm getting meeker. Might just make a meal while I'm getting meeker. Do I sound clear? Can you hear the soothing timbre in your ear? Look at what we did in the past year. Yeah, look at what we did.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ebbs and Flow. That's Esoteric Bible Study for the Love of Wisdom. I'm Daniel Naki Dan, and I am here today with the Morgan B and Nomad.
What up?
Hey,
Joshua
glad to be here.
Is out drinking green beer with his buddies. He said he's going to pop in later, so we might see him later. But we are going to get started and talking about Genesis 5. Chapter 5. Last week we talked about kind of Cain, and then it kind of got into Enoch a little bit. And I think we were wondering about Enoch, and if that was the same biblical Enoch, was the one from Cain. And after further reading, it is not. There is a second Enoch, and that's from the Seth line. And that's what we will get into in Genesis 5. Right, Nomad?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
So we speculated a lot, and all we had to do was just go to the next chapter. All our questions would have been answered. So do you want to read this, or I can read it, or Morgan, do you want to read it even?
Oh, no, you guys go ahead. I'm just glad to be here, y'all.
All right.
Whatever's easiest. I have it pulled up and ready to go if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nomad.
I love your
Genesis
voice.
5, verse 1. This is an account of the births of Adam. In the day of God's preparing man, in the likeness of God he hath made him. A male and a female he hath prepared them, and he blesseth them, and calleth their name man. In the day of their being prepared, and Adam liveth 130 years, and begetteth a son in his likeness, according to his image, and calleth his name Seth. And the days of Adam after his begetting Seth are 800 years, and he begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Adam which he lived are 930 years, and he dieth. And Seth liveth 105 years, and begetteth Enos. And Seth liveth after his begetting Enos 807 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth are 912 years, and he dieth. And Enos liveth 90 years, and begetteth Canaan. And Enos lived after his begetting Canaan 815 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Enos are 905 years, and he dieth. And Canaan liveth 70 years, and begetteth Mahalalel. And Canaan liveth after his begetting Mahalalel 840 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan are 910 years, and he dieth. And Mahalalel liveth 65 years, and begetteth Jared. And Mahalalel liveth after his begetting Jared 830 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel are 895 years, and he dieth. And Jared liveth 162 years, and begotteth Enoch. And Jared liveth after his begetting Enoch 800 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared are 962 years, and he dieth. And Enoch liveth 65 years, and begotteth Methuselah. And Enoch walketh habitually with God after his begetting Methuselah 300 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch are 365 years. And Enoch walketh habitually with God, and he is not, for God hath taken him. And Methuselah liveth 187 years, and begotteth Lamech. And Methuselah liveth after his begetting Lamech 782 years, begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah are 969 years, and he dieth. And Lamech liveth 182 years, and begetteth a son, and call his name Noah, saying, This one doth comfort us concerning our work, and concerning the labor of our hands, because of the ground which Jehovah hath cursed. And Lamech liveth after his begetting Noah 595 years, and begetteth sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech are 777 years, and he dieth. And Noah is a son of 500 years, and Noah begetteth Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis chapter 5.
Thank you very much, Nomad.
Um, what is your feeling about these time spans? It seems very odd to me that a lot of them were having children well into their hundreds, except for one that was only 62 years old. But then they lived for another 500. Some lived for 500 or 800 years more. One of them almost lived 1,000 years.
Yeah, I think Methuselah is one of the oldest people that lived, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, what is your take on the years? Do you think maybe time was different, atmosphere was different? I think we've talked about this somewhat before,
yeah.
but
yeah, I do think that the atmosphere was different and people were larger and everything seemed to be larger. And I think that people lived longer. And I think because of that, it almost seems like, perhaps people were, running out of things to do and an adjustment needed to be made so people didn't live in their carnal bodies so long. That seems to be what happened because then right after the flood, God says, and their days will be 120, right? And that's, we've kind of speculated. Yeah, some people, maybe there's some outliers, but pretty much that's the cap for most people if they make it that much. And that's usually the people that seem to be the lightest about them. People who don't take everything so seriously, in my opinion, from just observing, they seem to live, a lot longer because they're not stressing out about everything. But 120 seems to be close to the cap still to this day.
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
Right.
Or unlucky, however you want to look at it.
Well, my grandfather.
I just think how, depending on how intentional you are about everything, right? Like if you're not even thinking about your health, then yeah, you're probably going to succumb to a lot of our modern day living, which is more about the, instant gratification and less about longevity, I would say.
Most definitely.
My grandfather is 87, and you wouldn't know it. He looks like he's probably about 60 or something, because he still gets around. He still walks around pretty well. But he's kind of he's an old man, so he's like, when it gets you if you don't, do this right or do that right. So I don't know about that too much. And I had a grandma that died at 102. And she was kind of a mean old lady too. So
now I wouldn't say that it means they're not mean because the people I'm thinking about kind of are mean. But what I will say is they don't like let life get to them in a way, right? And so like they might be mean and stuff, but they're not gonna I guess stress out about like every little thing and it affecting them, if that makes sense. So they are kind of correlated, and I think ideally you have that lightness about you where you're not worried and you're still kind to people. But I do think people can sort of be mean to people, but like almost because they're like selfish or narcissistic. So it's like, their energy isn't being loosed by anybody, if that makes sense.
Well, my grandma's 85 and she just lost her license. She just got in a car accident and she can't drive anymore. But she's very pessimistic and like hates everything. Anything that anybody does, she's a super big worrywart. So, and she seems to be in pretty good health as well. So I don't know if you have something there or not, Nomad. Maybe my family.
Well, I mean, she's 85. I'm thinking if you're trying to live to 120, right? Okay. So that would still be a few years.
She's still got the
people that I've seen in their hundreds, like I'm talking, I've met people like 107. Like I had a old like adopted grandma that I used to go visit, and she was actually the oldest person I've ever met, and she had both about her. You could tell she wasn't like a person that worried a lot, but she was also very kind. But then the people seen like early hundreds and they're the ones that I've met at least were a little bit more, you could say mean, but maybe more a little bit narcissistic, but not worrying about every little thing, just kind of here for a good time. So, the saying, here for a good time, not a long time. I think sometimes it can actually, if you're not stressing about everything, you might live longer.
I think it has to do with like how you treat yourself too. Like, once you like grasp the concept that like if somebody is treating you awfully, it's not necessarily you. Or if somebody doesn't like you, like stop worrying about it because that's generally that person's problem, not yours. I think that there are concepts that, my great grandmother was 107 when she died, or I'm sorry, my great great grandmother, and my great grandmother just recently passed, and I think she was either 99 or 100, and they were native. They're native, and I think that like they had. First of all, being poor makes you worry about different types of things, and but like it also makes it brings out the best or worst in some
Makes you
people, like
strong.
the way you treat. Yeah, like, and then to realize that, how other people treat you is not your fault. I think that like that will alleviate a lot of things, or that like to know that you have purpose in this life. What really hurts me and gets me is that there's people in this world that like walk around that like, first of all, think they have no purpose. And second of all, being just like, useful idiots for something bigger. You know what I mean? So it's like crazy. Like once you like ascend to that or like gain the knowledge to, if nobody would have taught me that, I would have never known. And it seems to me like a lot of things might affect that, but like knowing that that's that person's fault, not yours. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and real quick, I just want to say welcome, Joshua. Glad you're
What
here.
up?
I see you're mentioning some stuff about DNA. Perhaps we were talking about atmosphere, but do you think there was perhaps some DNA manipulation involved to shorten the
Well, I think it was both.
telomeres?
Yeah,
Okay.
Sabat Shalom, and thanks for welcoming me on this fine holiday evening. Weevening.
Yeah. We just started 12 minutes ago, and we just
cool.
read Genesis 5.
Wow.
And that was the first topic that we had been discussing. So you haven't missed too much yet.
Cool. Yeah, I tried to get here quickly, but my friends wanted to go dancing, and I thought, well, it's very out of character for me to do something like that. And I'm the type that I think everything happens for a reason. So I went just to make sure I didn't miss anything deeply symbolic. And I did get some interesting syncs that occurred. So
did you dance?
Oh yeah, I mean,
okay,
that embarrassing,
that is worth
idiotic high schooler type song stuff. I mean, but the person
that's worth it.
But the friend that invited me is in salsa classes, and so now I got invited to salsa next Thursday. So that's
better go. You
I'm
better
a
go.
salsa fan, but I'm in it for the exercise, really. So anyway, it'll get better. Go. But yeah, it was lackluster dance party.
I'm in it for the exercise. That's like when crypto people say, I'm in it for the technology.
Or you read Playboy for the editorials. So
I'm just playing.
But
let us know how it goes.
Before the show's over, though, I would like to kind of talk about St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And how it may relate to the serpent and, all that jazz. So I can save what I have to say about that for later. But as it pertains to Genesis, though, it got me thinking. I thought, oh, interesting. So it may relate kind of in a way to what we were talking about. But as far as the climatic influences, I do think that things were, we had mega fauna and mega flora and things of that nature, because I think there was more oxygen saturating the air, which probably allowed things to get bigger. Now, that said, before the flood, it had never rained. when until the flood occurred. So
And do you
there
think it was tropical? I'm just curious
I
as we're
think
talking
so.
about this, painting a picture for people.
Well, and if you've ever kept a terrarium or aquariums and things like that, you can even like get the mist to hang over the
Right.
earth or whatever you want to call it, the ground part of the terrarium. You can actually achieve a level of humidity where the mist just kind of hangs over. And I would do that a lot when I had frogs, for instance, because they really liked that. And you couldn't even get them to chirp unless there was like mist in there and sun rays hitting the glass. Like there had to be very ideal conditions, but I digress. So I think, yes, the giants, there's probably like plesiosaurus and megalodon, like all that stuff, I think is kind of like from that era. And of course, next chapter, we'll be reading about the giants. As a reminder, I think you guys mentioned reaching out to Gary Wayne about that. But anyway, I think the giants themselves were probably another relic of that era. But I do speculate that maybe Yahweh did something to our DNA as well, because you mentioned how he shortened our years. So not only did we become smaller as a result after the flood, because I think the climate changed in some ways, but I think we might have been also genetically manipulated to not exceed a certain period of time, because we didn't have the spiritual purity to be allowed to live forever because of the carnal body, like you mentioned, which the giants were known for the destructiveness, their insatiable appetites, and they just consumed the land, as it says in some of the scripture. I can't remember if that's actually in the canon or not, but I know that some of the biblical texts, apocryphal perhaps, do characterize them that way, that they just literally consumed the land, and they ate people too. So this tradition of cannibalism and things like that, I think, is also a vestigial behavior from that era. But yeah, fully condensed. I think they lived in the earth, because you often see titans associated with the earth and things like that. But the angels some of them are supposed to be gigantic, holding up like the pillars of the earth and things like that. So I think that some of those things that maybe are still serving God are still huge, but because they're obedient, but it's like the more obedient we become, the smaller we became. The more sin we had, the smaller we got, So I think it's kind of interesting to look at maybe the effect sin has had on our DNA. Or, it started with Adam. He lived for 1,000 years, something like that. 996 years or something.
930.
Yeah. So, yeah, it seemed like, even at the fresh out of the package, so to speak,
right out the box.
yeah, 1,000 years was all his shelf life, So, and since then we're like at a 10% of that now, you know what I mean? So I think that when the rectification comes during the millennial reign, like we're going to be allowed to eat from that tree of life again. And we may not get to live forever, but I think we'll at least get to live as long as Adam did, which for me helps to explain the millennial reign, because after all, he lived to be 1,000 years. So that's just some speculation on my part that maybe we'll get back to these conditions. So maybe it'll begin to look like it did before over time. Who knows? But yeah, thanks for letting me weave on that a little bit.
Do you want to live for 930 years?
Dude, yeah, because I got so much to learn and do and see. I would learn instruments. I would, I have so many animals.
Okay.
But you got to realize
930, that's 9 centuries.
Yeah, but everybody would be living that long. You know what I mean? And you're not going to get old the way we think about it now. So you wouldn't actually get old until you were 800. You see what I mean? So you would have how you feel right now. You might only be at 200. You know what I mean? And still got 600 years of good living to do before you even got
Lord help me, no.
So I'm just saying, I feel like I could fill that time up pretty good, and I would travel more, you know.
But you'd have to get rid of like the things that would make you want to kill yourself, like your job, taxes, bills, all of these gravitational things that hold you down and make you weigh more, right?
Well, true, but you know, even in some of the examples of people that live forever, like vampires and stuff, they would just recreate lives, you know what I mean? And move around and stuff. So that's what I'm saying. Like I wouldn't just sit in a cave for 1,000 years. I would
Oh, hell no.
experience the world and you know, but anyway, I think that
I
we'll get that chance during the millennium.
DB Cooper it.
So that tree they're eating from in the Sumerian tablets, I think it's that tree. We might get to eat from that, you know, and finally experience that, but only after we've developed the discernment and the judgment, which was what was given to us when we ate from the tree. It did make us wise, but it did kill us at the same time.
Made us wise to evil.
Yeah. So I think that's very interesting. You know, like if you know evil, you aren't allowed to live. You know what I mean? It's kind of an interesting dichotomy, but that's where intellect comes from. It's like the evil.
So is it stupid to have children or is it smart to have children?
It's obedient because we were told to be fruitful and multiply. That's the only commandment I can't do. Or you know what I mean? I have a wife, so there's a mystery in that. So God bless anybody that's got a child.
I was like, oh, you don't have to be married. Oh, never mind.
Well, I mean, marriage is a sacrament, like a holy sacrament.
I understand.
Childbirth and stuff, that's a holy, like these are rites of passage that if you have the proper understanding or want to see it, I guess there's a lot hidden in that, I think. And
for sure.
I was just talking to one of the lady who invited me to the dance. She brought her daughter along.
I knew it was a girl.
She was
only girls can get you out to come dance.
No, I got a trivia team. They're on my trivia team. So, but she's a gynecologist, and and how that relates to the curtain and the Holy of Holies, and it was a really interesting conversation.
The curtain.
The Holy of Holies.
Yeah, but that's off topic because that's like later in Exodus when they build the tabernacle. Okay. Yeah, the curtain for the Holy of Holies, that's the hymen. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's what I thought you were referring to.
I just had that epiphany the other day.
Yeah. So I had a couple things here. One is I was kind of thinking of it as they're timesing these numbers by 10. So when it says Seth lived 800 years, it's 80, or 105 years and begat Enos. Seth lived 105 years. Maybe that's 15.
Like they're using the metric system.
Something like that. Yeah, maybe so. But I find what you guys said just as valid anyway. So it doesn't. I was just bringing up something else, like maybe because people
that was an interesting interpretation.
People often associate like the years of God to be like 1,000, and he built the world in 6,000 years, and then 7,000 years he was in the evening, and then all this stuff occurred while he was in that evening, and then Jesus died in the end of the seventh day. So I was just thinking, well, maybe these are based on a fraction of what God lived, 1,000 to 1, so maybe 100 or 10 to 1 or something like that. And maybe that's why we get these numbers. It's just a thought I had. If you guys want to talk about that, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that God, like Dan Winter says, time is a spin rate, essentially, right? So I think that God is like outside of that. And so for him, he's in a different spin rate. So what happens here, I think we are talking about what happens here as actually being, closer to 1,000. But outside of that, God's would be 1,000, because then he specifically says now their days will be 120 years, right? Yeah, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Spin rate. What if the world was turning a lot faster at that time, and so a spin or a day was a lot quicker, and the revolution was a lot faster? And you kind of think of what's that force called when you're spinning and you get pushed out. Like maybe that,
Centripetal force.
Centripetal
yeah,
force.
maybe
Yes.
There's
that
two
could
of them.
have,
Centrifugal.
maybe that force could have a reaction to the human body and make it elongated, make it taller, make it bigger, because of
That's
that
interesting.
centrifugal force, or because it's bringing it out, because the gravity is probably going to be different, so that would affect the gravity on the planet too. You would have to be that big to be compressed down to the earth. You'd have to have a lot of mass, otherwise you'd just float away, you'd levitate.
There's two of them. There's one that I think
You'd what?
pushes away, and one that draws to the center. So maybe if it's drawing us to the center, that could be what's making us smaller. Is that like you said, that enhanced gravity? So maybe it was less in the past, which would also explain the. So it could have been a combination of elements like the spin, the oxygen, etc.
I've also found my family's found fossilized palms, like from palm trees in the Pacific Northwest. So I do think there was perhaps a time where if it wasn't the whole world, at least some of the areas that we know of not being like this were actually tropical. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that at one time kind of all of Earth was more tropical?
Yes.
Sorry, one thing to add on that, because don't we also see like the blue zones where people are healthier and live longer as being more tropical?
Mhm. That's interesting.
I thought it was the other way around.
That's what I was just
Live-
about to.
You live
Yeah.
longer in colder climates, but I
Yeah.
think the reason for that would be that you're exposed to less pathogens, maybe.
Yeah, it kills germs. And heat causes more germs. That's why more people were dying of coronavirus in the winter. I mean, in the summer. I'm
Definitely on
sorry.
the equator, though. So that
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard about this.
And the equator's expanded as well. Like the areas on the equator look bigger than what they're portrayed on a map as well.
What's the blue? Why exactly are they called blue zones?
I don't know too much about it. I've just heard the term thrown around, and this conversation reminded me of it. So I'd have to look more into it. But yeah, I think like Costa Rica is one of them. I think California. So, but I don't think
Right.
they're not always necessarily tropical. But that's just kind of where my mind went to when we're talking about trying to figure out what was it? Was it genetics? Was it atmosphere? All of these things. Also, when I I just started an herb garden. And when you're starting it out, you want to have like a little dome on it, right? To help the germs, or sorry, to help the plants, the seeds germinate. So that's also interesting, right? Because we almost see this time of Earth when it was like perhaps domed off more, and then the firmament was opened or whatever. So it just reminded me of the planting process as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you're right. That might be the closest thing to that megafauna era that we have still today, like a vestigial. But to answer your question about the palms, though, I've even wondered if Pangea wasn't how, because imagine, I think that's kind of like how the flat earth could be true, is that at one time it was literally just a flat, or maybe not literally flat necessarily, but it was all one piece in a huge body of water. Because after all, when we read Genesis, it talks about how land was just formed in the water like that. So I think initially it was just a big flat plain on water, and then eventually it got broken apart. When the flood occurred, which would explain how fossils got moved around all over the place.
Mountains, valleys, canyons, and then the landscape changed afterwards, like then you were able to make distinctions in the sky. You know what I mean? Just by landscape. So of course these people thought the earth was flat.
The Atlas Mountains in Africa are the sister mountain range to the Appalachians, on the East Coast. So
Mhm.
it would even seem to suggest that Africa was once contiguous to North America.
Yeah, there's also a mountain range on the East Coast that's the same as England, Ireland.
Oh, well, but yeah, see, I think they all fit together, which would
Yeah.
imply a great cataclysm of some sort that maybe busted them all apart, which seems plausible, of course.
Or not even like busted them apart, but just filled it in more, right? So if a bunch of waters from above were entered into Earth and filled it in more, then all of the areas that used to be connected, now those become large oceans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that there was probably some division of like the four rivers, right? But I
Yes.
think that it was probably flooded, and then all of the valleys and everything were filled in and created oceans. And now we have these more isolated pockets of land. That's what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that actually, but I think also when the water came out of the sky, I mean, that's miles high. So, if you're ever taking a bucket and dumped it on soil or whatever, it just carves into it, dude. So I think, if it wasn't an asteroid or whatever, just the sheer force of all that water coming down onto the earth, I think just split it apart, just carved it all up, So in a way, I think both are true in that
Yeah,
sense. It's just, you got to think on a really big scale, like what would it look like if you just poured out water on sand? It would just, if you had if you created something out of dirt or sand and then you poured water on it, it would just tear it all to pieces.
right. Well, I think it did. I think that's why we just see these faint remnants of uh of like ancient civilizations that are like deep in the water, and then there's areas that are deep trenches, right? It looks very much like landscape that we know, but underwater. It is a curious question though. How do you think the flood happened? Do you think it was like this torrential flow from like the opening in the expanse, or was it like removing that dome essentially and creating a different atmosphere where now we actually have rain as we know it coming from above and from below? Does that make sense?
Well, the
Perfect
way
sense.
I think scripture discusses it in a couple of different ways. It says that the portals were opened up in the firmament. So I think that the firmament is there, of course, but that there's these windows or something that could be opened. And those were open to allow water in. But then the water also came up from the deep. So it seems as though there's valves on the top and bottom, and that all of them were opened. And so waters came in from below and above simultaneously.
Right, but the waters from above never stopped, right? Is because before that it was just waters coming up from below and sort of that mist perhaps, but we didn't, like you said, have rain as we know it. So do you think that there was some sort of literal just certain areas where water was let in, or do you think it was like changing the atmosphere kind of like we talked about in a way where now we have rain from above?
Well, for the first time ever this week, I saw something strange in the news that I'd never heard of, and it was called an atmospheric river or something like that. And it just
The
kind of looked like,
Adonis?
well, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I guess that's kind of what it does remind me of too. But I
We
saw that in the
just
news recently that over Portland, Oregon, I think it was hanging out. Like, it just looked like this big river in the sky, and it was going to dump all this water and stuff. So who knows? I
What?
mean, I guess you had to
we
be there to
just
see it.
we just had one of those in California about a month ago or so, and they called it an atmospheric river, and that's when it dumped like crazy here, and a bunch of stuff got flooded. And so yeah, I was watching the news when it was pouring here, and they were talking about an atmospheric river also.
So if that had happened for 40 days straight, what would have happened, you think? Like,
Oh,
is that a fair comparison?
would probably die. Dude, I think it happened for like 2 or 3 days, and it was a lot. Yeah, everything was flooded. People's cars were flooded. I mean, this was about 4 or 5 feet of water in some places, and mostly in like parking structures with cemented parking structures where cars were at. They got flooded up, and a lot of the river roads got flowed over, and businesses got flooded and stuff like that. But if that went on for 40 days and 40 nights, we'd be in deep trouble.
That's a good pun. You know, there was probably a lot less water then too before all this, like you said, Nomad. But where did it come from? So like outside the firmament, I've
Primordial.
often wondered if space is just water. You know?
Well, the
Well-
W and the M, you switch it, and it's like matter, water.
What if
So,
yeah, what if if there was a comet in impact on the Earth and that hit the water and created tidal waves or whatnot? What if that also created smoke or whatnot, which rose up into the atmosphere? Because I think in the flood, is it in the flood where they talk about like, maybe not, maybe I'm thinking of a different, maybe I'm thinking about Sumerian, but there was like a black mist in the sky that like kind of stopped the
That was in the
sunlight,
desert.
and that's why the sun
Is it
got blocked for a few days. And maybe just from that whole plumage of smoke being in the sky, it created a new type of atmosphere that I don't, but that doesn't make sense because there's volcanoes and stuff and they've been erupting for a long time. So maybe I'm
yeah,
off.
I think the water was here. It seems like based off of everything we know, it seems to predate because even in the Bible it says God was fluttering on the waters, right? We talked about that. It
Yeah.
didn't seem like it said God made the water.
No.
So I think the water was like the original substance used to form everything else, and God created a space within that, like a little bubble, and then he starts making Earth from that point on, right? So it's like water, expanse, and then land. Is that right?
I get where you're going with this because on day 2, that's when the firmament was made, right? But God never said it was good. God never said day 2 was good. He said day 3 was good twice.
There's also the salt water and fresh water. Those two things as distinctions too. I'm not sure if it mentions anything in Genesis about the differentiation between salt water and fresh water, but I do know in the Sumerian stories that's a really big deal, like between fresh and salt water, for instance. But fresh water, of course, we don't have salt water rain down, so it makes me wonder: was the water that was here already salt water? And then the water that rained down must have been maybe fresh water. So
It would make sense.
I don't know. That's just something I
Ocean.
guess I was thinking about there.
The ocean's salt water. You know what I mean? That would
Yeah,
make
yeah. I
they
think that was the
both
one
seem
that's
to
here
serve their
already.
purpose. You think the salt water was first? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it would make sense because salt water is buoyant, and so you got this land sitting in the water. I don't know. It just kind of makes practical sense to me. But then, like, what were
Expansion.
people drinking? So
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's kind of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it is strange though that to think about. But Tiamat is a lot of times associated with salt water as well, and of course the earth or the land of the earth anyway is a lot of times associated with her body, her corpse. So maybe he indeed used Tiamat, salt water and land to create earth. But then
Right,
again,
'cause
where did the fresh water come from? So it just makes me wonder.
it seems like
Eve.
based off of that, fresh water would be here first. Because salt is more of like earth, right? Wouldn't that be considered like a mineral or like a
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think the water that came from the deep was salt water, but I think the water that came from above must have been fresh. That's the only way I can rationalize it in my mind. It just doesn't make sense otherwise. But I see the point you're making about the salt, though. But it's just strange because there's just such a big deal made about it in the Sumerian thing. But is it even mentioned here? Is salt water anywhere in that?
No. But it's Eve, y'all. We know that. We went over that too. Eve is life. She's the spring in the dam. She's
Yeah,
like
the
the
fountainhead.
life
You mentioned that
force.
about that earlier.
Yeah. So like that, I think maybe Eve has something to do with fresh water and why we could sustain life here, because we wouldn't be able to if all we were drinking was salt water.
You just made me think of something else too. Like, well, when a child's born, a mother's water breaks. But is it salt water or fresh water? Because we are salty ourselves. So that's another
Uh,
interesting thought that came to mind.
I think
Well, the other thing is,
fresh water
go
comes
ahead, John.
from the ground, and because it gets purified by going through the rocks and whatnot, and then the salt water is the sea. So if you had because a lot of the springs and the rivers are usually fresh water, it's like snow melt and ice melt and whatnot
Yeah.
too. So
Or mineral water, again, because it's
yeah,
coming from the earth.
yeah,
so it's gone through that, like once again, the very beginning of Genesis, like where he, uh, where like he says he makes, humans and nature and it's good. Wait, we scroll down just a little bit, but he says something about I think it's the 12th line where he's like, okay, you know, after, yeah, herb sowing seed in its kind, fresh fruit. And it's basically when the fruit came out of the ground, it was good. So once things go through the earth and get purified, it's supposed to be good.
Yeah, I think, and also if you want plants to grow, generally you would use fresh water, right? So if it
yeah.
was the waters from below that were keeping everything healthy and growing lusciously, I would think that would be fresh water originally. But who knows? I think there are ones that thrive in salty water, but not as common, I would say.
Maybe the salt only came after God became salty and wanted to kill
Well,
us.
that's what I'm kind of wondering. I mean, salt does have a lot of qualities that are good, right? Of like preservation.
Yeah.
Um, so
Don't be
it could
salty, bro.
just be like it could just be that everything was fresh water, earth was added to the equation, expanse was added to the equation, and with that we get this other substance of salt water, which is like the mingling of earth and water. That's kind of how I'm seeing it, but open to interpretations.
No,
Yeah.
I think you're onto
I
something,
think
but I
we're all
do want to
right.
mention day two. Day two was never said to have been good, and that's the day that the firmament was made. So your point that I don't even know if knew you were trying to make earlier is co-signed right there in Genesis. So there you go. Yep. And it was never made good. So
Right,
So
because so we were separated from God more in this perhaps, but and all the
or we're
pieces
still
weren't
on day
together yet,
two.
right? Yeah, all the pieces
What
aren't
day
together
is
yet,
it?
so it's not good. It's like when you make some music or a piece of content and you're not finished and you don't want people to see it yet, right? It's like
Mhm.
it's not good yet. Give me some time. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that's a good point.
the clay's just sitting there on the wheel. It's not.
Right.
to move on to another
Literally.
point, Joshua, you had mentioned megalodon and dinosaurs. What are
Oh
your
yeah.
guys' thoughts on dinosaurs? It seems to be, I don't know. A lot of people don't think dinosaurs ever existed. I know a lot of Christians don't believe dinosaurs ever existed. What are your guys' kind of thoughts on dinosaurs?
Don't tell my nephew that dinosaurs don't exist because he will I mean, that's his life dedication right there. He can go through every single one and tell you their genealogy too.
I personally think that they were some of the abominations that were created,
Mhm.
and not in the blueprint. which is why they were killed off for the most part. Although I think some animals that are around today, like crocodiles and certain lizards and such, might be relatives to them. And of course, because things are smaller now, they too are smaller. So I mean, imagine a Komodo dragon or a gecko being huge. In the right conditions, they probably could have got quite large. But so I think they too suffer from the same curse in a sense that we suffer in that smallness of sorts. So I think at one time they were real, very real. And I think the dragons were probably real also, and related to this type of dinosaur phenomena. Because it's interesting. Yeah. A lot of people like dragons and like to fantasize about those being real, but then for me, they and dinosaurs are the same thing. And I think they probably were able to speak and probably a lot more intelligent than we think. And I think they ruled this earth at one time. Which is part of the reason they were wiped out, I think.
Is that the serpent in the garden then?
Yeah, like his children, essentially. And Lilith, perhaps. Lilith was a lot of nations that were born. So I think that, I think it's all real, man. I mean, you gotta have an imagination to believe in God in the first place. So why not have dinosaurs? Yeah, I think it's possible.
Okay. I want to get Nomad's opinion on that too, but also, and you too, Morgan. But also, do you think they went extinct 65 million years ago, or that man actually lived with dinosaurs? And then also, were these dinosaurs sentient? Did they have brains? Could they think on their own, like humans? Because that kind of gives rise to the whole reptilian idea, I guess you could say. Or maybe there was a human-like reptilian species that existed along with dinosaurs, and it wasn't till later that, this human body came about. So just some thoughts on that one.
Well, I'd say that, they were contemporaries before the flood, but we don't hear about the dinosaurs being taken on the ark. So I think that was when the sheep and the goats got separated, so to speak, like they just weren't taken. And so therefore they were, in a sense, killed off. And I do think that they were probably sentient. And I do think they've been trying to mix with us. Now, I think a lot of times when we found the bones and this, that, and the other, I think that those were probably relating to a certain type of angel or a particular angel, kind of like how they all probably had, like for instance, such and such angel might have been all the dinosaurs that looked a certain way. It might have been his children or his or her children. So, because I think their aim was they wanted to create their own races and their own creatures, and just like God did. But of course, they weren't permitted to do that. And it's kind of interesting too, because when you read about the stories of Lilith and some of the other fallen angels, it seems as though they were doing this as like an act of rebellion, and Yahweh wiped them out because they were being disobedient and creating like abominations, as they were known as.
I'm with you on that.
What do you think, Morgan?
I am so, like he said, if you're gonna have an imagination, you got to go all out, man. I'm with that, but we also have like parts of our brains that come from
reptilians,
certain types of reptiles. Yeah. So hold on, what are you bringing up, Nomad?
It's called the R complex.
So in Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, it says, and this is in the Young Literal Translation, it says, "And God prepareth the great monsters and every living creature that is creeping, which the waters have teemed with, after their kind, and every fowl with wing after its kind, and God seeth that it is good." So it's just interesting because in my translation it says, "And God prepareth the great monsters, and it was good," right? And
Right.
if you look up the original Hebrew, that word is used 21 times for dragon. So in
Oh,
most cases, this word is actually translated dragon.
Holy shit.
Three
Or
times it's
whale.
well, yeah, three times it's serpent, three times it's whale, and one time it's sea monster. So in other words, I think there were these dragons or dinosaurs at one point, and I think that they were perhaps good, perhaps super wise. But there was some corruption that happened at some point, it seems like.
Well, I mean, what makes you think that they still aren't living?
No,
Right.
maybe they are. Well, and like I think I've shared with you guys, I've had an experience with a serpentine entity. So I think that there is some sort of, like you said, intelligent species. However, whether it's in this realm or another realm, and they're able to communicate with us, there does seem to be a correlation there, especially since Jesus said, "Be wise as serpents," right, and harmless as doves. So I think that there is something to that.
um,
There's a lot to
so
that in the firmament.
in my studies, I have come across a lizard called a tuatara lizard, and it has a third eye on its head. And these lizards are said to have existed before dinosaurs, according to science or whatever. That they were around before dinosaurs were around. And I found it was interesting that tuatara sounds a lot like Tartaria. And so my connection was that I think maybe that there were these human type lizards with a third eye that existed before the time of dinosaurs, and they were kind of the first ones. And then the dinosaurs existed, and then they coexisted. And then, yeah, maybe the dinosaurs got wiped out during the flood. Even there are artifacts that show humans and dinosaurs together, and even it talks about a dinosaur or a dragon breathing fire in the Book of Job, which I think I read a couple of weeks ago. And so there's the Leviathan monster. So I think that dinosaurs did kind of coexist with humans at some time. And I think the idea of them being extinct 65 million years ago is what is the preposterous part, and that they were actually living, maybe only like 100,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, even. And I think maybe the flood changed a lot of the stuff going on in the atmosphere, maybe even the spin rate that we were just mentioning, and that caused everything to shrink and become smaller. And you had outliers of these giants, right, that existed. You also had outliers of these dragons that existed, because at one point they were going around trying to eradicate all of these types of things in history. So I think there was, when it says, the Bible says, and they still lived in earth after the flood, I think that some of these monsters still existed, and they kind of made it their duty to go around and take them out and take out the giants.
Deus Volt. Leviathan's also kosher, by the way. So when it says that these sea monsters are good, that they're also good to eat. I mean, like they're literally kosher. I mean, they have fins and they have scales. I mean, I'm totally being serious. It's legit.
I believe you because like I think it gets down to literal words literally mean what you are reading on the like in the Bible, and then also esoterically.
That brings up an interesting point of the life waters and life seed coming from the water, and the water being purification. So it would make sense that these animals that came from water would be kosher. That's why nobody cares about eating fish really too much, because they're coming from the waters.
Well, mind you, not all fish, like catfish, shark.
Bottom feeders
there
now.
are, but not even bottom feeders. Just like there are sharks, not necessarily a bottom feeder, but just it is tricky. So but yeah, the descriptions of Leviathan does talk about it breathing fire and boiling the water, and just all sorts of crazy stuff like that. But he also Yahweh also slays Leviathan to feed his people at one point too. So I think that's really interesting because I think the tabernacle at some point, I think it's describing the tabernacle and how he fed his people in the desert or something like that. I wondered if maybe they used the skin of Leviathan as the like the tent canopy. You know what I mean? Like, because it talks about
Mm.
skins of Leviathan. I used to wonder what that meant. So so part of me wonders if he didn't like slay this beast for them to eat, and then they used its bones and skin to like create the tabernacle, which would make sense because the Levite
That's what I like.
priests,
Wait,
the
what?
Leviathan Levites, right?
Mhm.
It blows my mind to think about.
No, don't go there. Like cannibalism.
Well, they weren't cannibals because
Basically.
they weren't fish themselves, I guess. But you know what I mean. Like it was
I'm
a kosher
joking.
beast,
Well, think about
That
divine
is so
kosher
funny.
beast.
also if they were to skin a Leviathan, this is maybe kind of where they got the idea of scale mail, chain mail, because they were unable to pierce Leviathan. So they're like, oh, if we develop this chain mail or whatnot to protect our skin, maybe we won't get stabbed. And also
That's a really
the
yeah.
idea of housing and how to lay down the branches on the top of the roof, the thatching, just like we have in our roofs today, we have it overlap on the top so that way no water seeps in, just like scales. So maybe that's where they got the idea to put
Dude, like
roof
shingles,
stones. Yeah,
right?
shingles. Yeah.
But yeah, there's behemoth too. So there was a so it's talking about the
Woolly
water and land
mammoth.
here. Yeah, so there was one with land and there was one with water, which is interesting because in Revelation 13, there's the beast of the sea and the beast of the land, and the mark of the beast is associated with each of those. So there might even be something there to weave on.
Hmm. Yeah, then they just find some woolly mammoths alive somewhere.
Right?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
I
they're
heard
going to
something.
mix it with existing elephant genes to try and produce a woolly mammoth.
Oh, they're gonna make one in the lab. Great. So we got woolly mammoths coming back, red heifers, and leviathans. Jurassic Park.
Well, Godzilla, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, Godzilla.
No, turtle dragons.
Then we get the
The
judgment we
Koopa.
deserve with all these
Bowser's.
divine beasts.
Like seriously though, but this is also in the book of or in the keys of Enoch about like uh, change altering how to alter your DNA so therefore you could be more meta like metallurgy basically. Hold on and I'll see what I can, it's on my phone, but because and it also speaks about breaking the firmament and opening up the waters between the moon and earth so that there's like this space for like the stars, the moon, and earth, and then there's another firmament beyond that. And then I guess, they're trying to break that or what have you. But that's really crazy that you said that. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm gonna find that what I was
Yeah,
talking about.
that is interesting because, like I mentioned, I'm starting an herb garden. You also have a layer that's like the drip layer, so moisture doesn't get stuck and it can like breathe. So there could be potential for like, Paul talks about the third heaven. Is that right? I think Joshua. So,
Yeah, I know
you
what you're
could
talking
have
about.
like that third layer, that second layer, depending on how you number it. That's
Yeah.
sort of for the expanse, but then the waters above and the waters below.
Yep.
In fact, I think each of the planets is contained within its own firmament of sorts. Like they
Yes.
are each in charge, so to speak, of their sphere, or they're kind of, a lot of times they're referred to as the governors. And so I think that maybe there's something to that. And then in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, there's these various gates that, he passes through. And again, it kind of reminds me of him going through the firmament, kind of like Enoch did, or something
Yeah.
like that.
And that's
Do you
what basically happens is he goes up there and he's like, okay, well, I had to get rid of my meat suit. So I turned into a light body. Um, and then when he is, I mean, first of all, it's like you're reading a sci-fi novel. Like, I'm like, am I reading? What is this, fiction or nonfiction? Oh, it's a like sea scroll. You know what I mean? Like, it was nuts. But it basically, the information that it was giving, like, it's like how to transmute your self into light. And it gives you the instructions on how to do it, which I thought was nuts too. But
what do you guys think about that? What do you think about the idea of trying to sort of ascend into all light, right? Do you think that is the goal, or do you think there's some sort of oscillation happening between sort of spirit and the flesh, where it almost, when the trap perhaps being always thinking the other side is better instead of, embracing the sort of the present, the combination that we currently are in. Does that make sense?
that's a freaking good question. I ask myself that all the time. I'm like, am I in the complete wrong, or like you know what I mean? Like, sometimes I'm like, what am I alive right now, or is this all just like a joke? Because the things that are happening currently, like, this was written in the Book of Enoch. The keys to future biophysics are given in nuclear membranes involved in language transparency coatings beyond acid denaturation and in gel formation by nuclei connecting different mammalian chromosomes to one another. So basically, like, and then it's set, and then it keeps on the, it just goes into more detail about, how your DNA works, and how, the messenger RNA is like your pathway, like your messengers to your spirit, to the one, or what have you, and like denaturing that, or altering that, or, could possibly affect, the way that you speak with your higher power, or whoever guides you, or, whatever you believe in. It gets into that. I'm sorry, I didn't know we were gonna go into that, or I would have like had that all fixed. But it talks about your proteins in your DNA, and it has a letter, like a Hebrew glyph for each one. Um, it's incredible to me, like the different things that they knew back then. So when you ask, if you were to have asked me that a year ago, I would have been like, there's no way. But like, after like really, really looking into it, I kind of do think that they had this information. Yeah.
Joshua.
Go ahead, Joshua.
Well, thank you. So there's some talk about DNA having light components to it. So I think that there's probably something where in our pristine state before the original fall, I think we wore garments of light. And that when we fell, that's when we became naked, is because our garments disappeared. And then Adam and Eve realized that they were naked and tried to cover themselves with the fig leaf. So I think that humans have been trying to make their way back to that state where we have that wedding garment, which is interesting because I think Paul talks about this a little bit too, how we'll be changed and things of that nature. But in Revelation, it talks a lot about the wedding of the Lamb, and in some parts of the Orthodox Greek Orthodox liturgy, they talk about in the creed, I think, or excuse me, no, it's the prayer before communion. It talks about if I am at the wedding and I don't have a garment, the angels bind me up and throw me out or something like that because I won't have my garment on. So it's talking about like people that try to get into heaven that won't have the garment on. It'll be clear that they didn't get in the way they were supposed to because they won't have the garment on. And the only way you can get that garment is through the blood of the Lamb. So somehow, some way, there's a spiritual mechanic involved there where to get us back to that light body, the Christ was like this way that was made to get us back to that. And if you don't have that, this like there's no other way to get it because we lost it already. So I think that's really interesting to think about the light body in that way. And I think that our bodies here, as far as physical bodies, are just for Earth.
Yes.
I don't think they're meant to be off the planet. I think it's honestly probably a grave sin to leave the planet in this body. You know,
It is.
It's just disobedient.
Or like, is it even possible? Like, I know I sound like nuts or what have you, but like maybe they just get to the outer firmament that was released during the flood, and that's as far as they can get because that's as far as they can go.
Well, if we were going to take like a contemporary scientific approach, you could even refer to the Van Allen radiation belt, which apparently anything beyond a certain distance from Earth, it's just radiation and kills you. You know, so a human really can't exist past a certain point anyway,
Right.
if that's true. Which you know that would be the only practical use for robots and AI. You know, if you're going to make that crap, do it off the planet.
Yeah.
Send it out into space because that's the only practical use for it, I think. But you know, but yes, I think the light body and everything goes back to this garment of light, which probably were new wine into new skins. Exactly, no man. I think this probably also relates to the chakras, the 7 chakras, and things of that nature too. You mentioned earlier about our reptilian components, like we have a reptilian part of our brain, but also the Kundalini spirit is a lot of times serpentine. And I think that could be another result of this interbreeding or whatever may have happened in the garden. And then Dan was talking about the parietal eye that some of the lizards have. Now, you can find references to this too in humans, except it was called the lantern of Osiris. And it was that the human skull used to have these fontanelles that didn't ossify. So there were soft spots in the brain, or excuse me, soft spots on the skull.
Which babies have at birth.
Yep.
Exactly. And we still have them too in the side of your head. And that's where we call that your temple because your head's your temple. So, we still have like a vestigial thing of this lantern of Osiris in the side of our head. That's the thinnest part of our skull. And so it was this area that we seem to be able to transmit, probably how Adam and Eve spoke to animals, I would imagine, was using their pineal gland like through their forehead or however it was, like the third eye usually appears in the middle of the forehead. Well, I think that was where this fontanelle was, and it was like a direct connection to the pineal gland. And I think the garment of light and everything like that is all like interrelated to that. Because after all, the lantern of Osiris it's likely emitting light.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say that, with the transmutation idea and being able to transmute yourself into light, I think, you could do that. Astral projection is kind of similar to that. I think that in a way, before maybe the flood happened or whatever, when people lived in a different way, that was possible. And I think that's why kind of magic and like transmutation of objects and everything. I think that's kind of why that picked up, is because they wanted that ability back, and they're trying to use science and uh, knowledge and know-how to figure out how to do that again. That's kind of like the idea of the
Yeah, without
mystery
God.
schools. Yeah, without God. Uh, Not necessarily without God, I would say, because that ability was given to us before, and for some reason we lost it, whether it be the flood or
The
for
fall.
whatever, the fall, or yeah, maybe
The fall. And then
through
the flood was
hybridization we uh, devolved into lesser beings from what we once were, and so we were trying to get that back, and that's why we, or not we, but that's why people develop magic in the magic schools, was to be able to learn how to do these things again, and even levitation was a big deal to be able to levitate. There's some Irish druids that came over to Jerusalem because there's this Simon Magus knew how to levitate, and this druid wanted to learn how to levitate from him. So there's an idea of these magical abilities that we possessed at some point, or you can be able to do through knowledge. And knowledge, I think, is a big deal. I think that's part of what we're here to do, is to learn and fill ourselves with knowledge. I think it references that in the Bible, even Jesus is the Word and God is the know-how, right?
well, like it even says in Genesis, well, I don't know exactly where, but it said the fall took several generations to catch up with the human gene pool and degeneration and decay. So I think that so then what I found out is that this type of Jewish faith or religion, or what these people, this group of people, um, they carefully noted their genealogy. Like it was always noted. So when they're telling you, or the Bible is telling you the specific genealogies and the specific years of how long people lived, they're revealing that to you, because uh, long before this was written, they have always kept a record of their genealogy, because they've always been persecuted. I mean, since the beginning of time. So that's uh, why they did it also, is so that the future people could recognize the righteous bloodline, because somewhere we've gotten crossed in the mixed hairs of it all. And like the post flood, after the flood, so there were 10 patriarchs before the flood, but then all knowledge got wiped away and what have you. Then we have 10 patriarchs after the flood, but Noah is the bridge of knowledge from the old world to the new world. So any knowledge that we have acquired or gotten or get comes from Noah. Sorry. Thank you for
Don't be
coming to my
sorry.
TED Talk.
Thank
But
you.
that's where basically that's how that, has gone. And that's why in each patriarch, by the way, had Adam through Noah, they each have and not only their name, but what their name means, and it all means something different, which is pretty cool. But anyway,
that's something I wanted to get into later, actually. But
okay.
but Nomad, read this right here about Simon Magus.
Okay, yeah. Since you brought it up, I thought we would just do a little refresher on who he was. Simon Magus was a Samaritan Magus or religious figure of the first century AD who converted to Christianity and later clashed with Philip the evangelist. He is mentioned by Luke in Acts 8, 9 through 24 and appears in Gnostic texts, but these accounts are unlikely to be historically reliable due to their anonymous authors. But essentially, he was a sorcerer who was sort of claiming Christ, but didn't. And I was going to pull up the actual verses here. We could go over them. But Joshua, did you have anything to add on Simon Magus?
Um,
Well, I'm not largely familiar with him specifically, but what he was asking them to do was he was offering payment to learn about the transmitting of the Holy Spirit.
mhm.
And in the Greek Orthodox Church, their big claim to fame, so to speak, like what they say makes them so special. They don't phrase it that way. I'm just kind of saying it that way. They talk about apostolic succession, which is from the time of Pentecost, where the Holy Spirit came down and entered into the disciples, and then every priest since then has been in a succession of apostolic succession. So when they put the laying on of hands and transfer that Holy Spirit, just like Morgan was talking about the genealogy thing, well, it's kind of like that in a way too. Even though it's not genes, it's like the spiritual genetics in a sense. I don't know a better way to characterize it.
Yeah.
But the fruit of the Spirit. There you go. So he's trying to purchase from them this. In other words, he wants them to lay their hands on him and give him the anointing. And so today, when priests, lay their hands on people, that's what they're supposed to be doing. But I'm not so sure that they have that in them anymore. But at one time, I think they did, and it was kind of like the maybe even like the electricity of the Ark of the Covenant, for instance. Like it was something that coursed within their body, and they could
speak in tongues.
Well, it manifested in different ways with each person, but I think that's the same thing that was used to resurrect Lazarus, the same thing to heal the blind. But anyway, I think Simon wanted that. And it's just interesting because we kind of see here where he was trying to pay to become a priest, essentially.
Right. And so this comes from Acts chapter 8 in the Bible, and I can just read it real quick. Starting at verse 9. Simon the sorcerer. Now for some time a man named Simon had practiced sorcery in the city and amazed all the people of Samaria. He boasted that he was someone great, and all the people, both high and low, gave him their attention and exclaimed, "This man is rightly called the great power of God." They followed him because he had amazed them for a long time with his sorcery. But when they believed Philip as he proclaimed the good news of the kingdom of God in the name of Jesus Christ, they were baptized, both men and women. Simon himself believed and was baptized, and he followed Philip everywhere, astonished by the great signs and miracles he saw. When the apostles in Jerusalem heard that Samaria had accepted the word of God, they sent Peter and John to Samaria. When they arrived, they prayed for the new believers there that they might receive the Holy Spirit. Because the Holy Spirit had not yet come on any of them, they had simply been baptized in the name of the Lord Jesus. Then Peter and John placed their hands on them, and they received the Holy Spirit. When Simon saw that the Spirit was given at the laying on the apostles' hands, he offered them money and said, "Give me also this ability so that everyone on whom I lay my hands may receive the Holy Spirit." Peter answered, "May your money perish with you because you thought you could buy the gift of God with money. You have no part or share in this ministry because your heart is not right before God. Repent of this wickedness and pray to the Lord in the hope that he may forgive you for having such a thought in your heart. For I see that you are full of bitterness and captive to sin." Then Simon answered, "Pray to the Lord for me so that nothing you have said may happen to me." After they had further proclaimed the word of the Lord and testified about Jesus, Peter and John returned to Jerusalem, preaching the gospel in many Samaritan villages. So yeah, that hopefully summarized it pretty good. But essentially, yeah, he was trying to buy God's power, right? Instead of going through the process of making sure you're pure first, which I think is what this is all about. It's like with great power comes great responsibility. So if you're not going to be responsible with that power, you're probably not going to be given it. That seems to be built into the nature of things at the higher levels anyway.
Weighing your
I
soul
feel like
against a
it's the
feather,
opposite.
because
Well, I
sin,
think you
sin,
can.
sin is a tremendous weight that holds you down. And so if you can alleviate yourself of sin, which is purifying your soul, then you can weigh yourself against a feather and enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right. And I think there are many who try and, become powerful by other means. And sure,
Yes.
they're successful to some level, but I don't think that they are doing the kind of things that Jesus was doing.
Mhm.
This kind of reminded me too of the Antichrist, because it talks about how he'll be able to do great signs and wonders and fool a lot of people. So
Right.
this study here on Simon Magnus is pretty interesting. I'm going to have to maybe do a comparison study in Revelation with this fellow here.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I
it's
think it is a similar spirit for sure.
the Druid story that I heard that contains Simon Magus. I forget the Druid's name. It's, in Irish, so it's hard to pronounce, but he went to find John the Baptist and get his head, and he was able to succeed and do so and get John the Baptist's head, and he brought it back. That along his journey, he saw the Simon Magnus guy and saw that he was able to levitate and wanted to learn how to levitate from him.
Hold on. So here's another thing. The Antichrist also has an image that speaks. And what this really reminds me of is having the head and making it talk, like an oracle, because Odin did that with Mimir, a giant. He took his head and like used herbs and stuff to resurrect it, and it would dispense wisdom and stuff. And or maybe not Mimir, but it was some giant that he.
Yeah, I thought that was Thor.
No, I'm pretty sure it was Odin. But at any rate, the point I'm trying to make is that that there's a process to do that, apparently, which is the definition of a Baphomet, is like a disembodied head that's been reanimated, and then it's like an oracle and dispenses knowledge or prophecy or something like that. So that story about Simon with the head of John the Baptist really does remind me again of that Antichrist story.
It wasn't Simon, though.
That's so weird. Pardon?
It wasn't Simon that had his head. It was
whoever had the head. Pardon, I was just getting mixed up with the names, but that motif is what I was talking about. Who had the head?
I'm gonna look it up right now.
Okay, but this involved Ireland, though, like the Druids and such.
Mm-hmm.
Might connect to that Egyptian princess as well. Tia Tiffy, I think her name was. Prophet Jeremiah, I think, is who took her up there to Ireland.
His name,
interesting.
The Druid's name was Mog Ruth, Mogruith. And his daughter was
my friends call me Mog.
Talakdiga, traveling from County Kerry to Middle East to study the magic of Simon Magus, and how on the way Mogruth becomes the executioner of John the Baptist.
Yikes. That would connect him to the story of who's that lady that ordered the death of John the Baptist? It was a woman, right? It wasn't Bathsheba or
yeah. She had her husband do it, right? Who was the leader? Was it who was the main guy there? It wasn't Herod, right? It was
oh yeah, maybe it was Herod.
Was it Herod?
Herod Antipas.
There's a couple different Herods, but yeah, I think
according to Josephus. after imprisoning him at Maccareus because he feared John's influence might enable him to start a rebellion.
Yeah, Herod Antipas.
Yep.
I think that his wife was the one that put the bounty on him, or something of that nature. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I think his wife wanted him to do it. It was like her request or something. I know what you're talking about.
I mean, yeah, it wouldn't shock me at all. It wouldn't shock me if her name was Hera.
Herod.
Herodias is her name.
Oh, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
That's funny.
Hera, yeah. So Maug Ruth means slave of the wheel. It's a figure in Irish mythology, a powerful blind druid of Munster who lived on Valentina Island, County Kerry. He could grow to enormous size, and his breath caused storms and turned men into stone. He wore a hornless bull hide and a bird mask, and flew in a ship called the Roth Ramach, the oared wheel. He had a fiery ox-driven chariot with blazing jewels that made night seem as bright as day, a star-speckled black shield with a silver rim, and a stone which could turn into a poisonous eel when thrown in the water. So this, remember how a lot of them would throw their staffs down to turn them into snakes.
Yes.
The stories of Maug Ruth are set in various periods of Irish history. Some say he lived during the reign of the 3rd century High King Cormac Mac Airt, while others put him in Jerusalem during the time of Christ. In Labor Gabala Adarin, he is said to have died in the reign of Conmail, nearly 2,000 years before Cormac's time, perhaps due to his array of times and settings. Poets attributed the Druid with extraordinary longevity. He lived through the reign of 19 kings, according to one story. His powers and long lifespan have led some to conclude he was a humorized sun or storm god. The various medieval legends about his adventures in the Holy Land at the dawn of Christendom paint him as an interesting and mysterious character, a defender of paganism and an enemy of Christianity. He is said to be a student of Simon Magus, who taught him his magic skills and helped him build Roth Ramach, which is the flying ship. Roth Ramach is described as a flying machine with great destructive power. It blinded those who looked at it, deafens whoever hears it, and kills whoever it strikes. Prophecy attributed to Saint Columba describes the ship as laying waste to Europe before the Last Judgment. Another vehicle attributed to him is the chariot. This description leads scholar Aidan M. O'Leary to speculate he may have been a euthemerized sun god. Euthemerized is an approach to which the interpretation of mythology in which mythical accounts are presumed to have originated from real historical accounts or personages. Eumerism supposes that historical accounts become myths as they are exaggerated in the retelling. So, in at least two other poems, Maug Ruth is identified as the executioner who beheaded John the Baptist, bringing a curse to the Irish people. He cuts an equally impressive figure in the siege of Knocklong, set in Cormac Mac Airt's time. Here he defeats Cormac's druids in an elaborate magical battle in exchange for land from King Fiachu Mulathan of southern Munster, from whom Cormac had been trying to levy taxes. Maug Ruth's daughter was Tlachta, a powerful druidess who gave her name to the hill and country Meath, and a festival celebrated there. Tlachta, who was raped by Simon Magnus while her father was learning magic, gave birth to 3 sons, Dorb, Puma, and Muak. The territory Magruth received for his descendants was Fear, Mage, Fene, later known as Fermoy. The medieval tribe of Fermag Fene claimed descent from him, although they were ruled by unrelated O'Keefes of Egonacht Glendamach. He married the Kalak, and together they lived at the site what is now Labasale Wedge Tomb until, in a fit of jealousy, after he fell in love with her sister, the hag threw a boulder at the druid, knocking him to the river Funchen, where he died.
Dang.
These dark magicians love their flying machines.
Yeah, right.
This reminds me of Jack Parsons, and he's into the super like John D and Edward Kelly, like summoning these entities and
Oh my God.
sex magic, and then he's responsible for making jet fuel. So he's like the father of rocketry.
Didn't he
You know,
steal someone's wife from them? The dude was a pimp too.
yeah, there was wife swapping going on with the dark magicians for sure. There, and it was
Yes.
just always like sort of taking advantage of each other. It seems like just very much not the energy you really want to be around. At least I don't. But
No,
these are
but
like the people responsible for our modern day like space program.
A lot of
we
the goddesses also had flying machines.
Right, and he was so he was like known for levitating, right? And I remember one time like seeing this video on this monk, and he was talking about like how levitating is like not an a great thing to aim for because it's very much like a show off thing versus like he was in other words saying like it was just interesting. I'm correlating this because he was like that's not going to help you ascend or like evolve your spirit or treat other people better. It's more of like people looking to do that. It's almost like an ego thing of like, oh look, I can do this. Like it's a cool trick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just
it's a
interesting to
power
see
trip.
that. It's an interesting to see that as one of the characteristics he's known for. Just reminded me of that monk.
It's a 100% power trip to do that because it really is like there's no need to levitate. And I think also it has something to do with the outer firmament, the outer area of space. I think that's what these people are trying to get to or get back to. Maybe the planets, maybe the moon. I don't know, but there's something going on in like the skies that these people are trying to, either get back to or get to or have contact with, I believe.
Yeah, it's interesting. It mentioned something about being powered by lightning. I think I saw
Hmm.
that somewhere. And we do get stories of that. People say that there's machines out there that fly into the storms almost as if they're recharging. So I
Yeah,
do think there's something to that, and I think this technology exists and has existed. I would just question the fruit of the spirits behind them, responsible for the flying machines. Because
for
again, it
sure.
seems like there's a lot of dark magic going on behind them, which is just interesting to note. Because I think levitating could be very useful and helpful, but when again, I think it gets back to what's the intent behind it, right? If your intent is to help others and build up community, then perhaps. But if it's just to fly around and look cool and take advantage of people, not so great.
Or to like gain power. Cause like imagine just walking down the street and someone just start levitating. Like
Right,
these people keep it secret, if they can, unless they
David
have
Blaine.
to, I'm sure. I'd be
right.
like, what the hell?
Um, well, if we're finished with that, I wanted to get into another question. Did you guys have anything else to add to that, or we good?
No, I'm good. That was a
Um,
fun weave, though. Thanks for bringing him up.
yeah, man. The other thing I wanted to talk about, well, you brought up the question actually of transmutation, and then kind of got into that. um, So the other thing I wanted to bring up about this chapter 5, is it lists the ages of how long they live. So we got into like whether or not we thought they were actually living that long and whatnot. But this brings up another question of time, and when was creation made and when did the flood happen? Because to me, I always think of the flood as like 10,000 BC, the Younger Dryas time period. But I know biblically, a lot of people believe it was around 2400 BC. And I think that people have actually done the math on the genealogy in the Bible to bring it back to that date. So I wanted to know, like, your guys' thoughts on how old Earth is, basically, and when you think that the flood happened, what time period was that? And I have a list here that, and you can either agree or disagree with these, but this is from Answers in Genesis, a Bible timeline. It says creation was 4004 BC. The flood was 2348 BC. The Tower of Babel was 2246 BC, which seems only 102 years after the flood. They're already building a tower to heaven. That seems weird to me. Abraham was 1996 BC. Joseph 1745 BC. Moses and the Exodus was 1491. David was 1085. The monarchy divides in 975 BC. Assyrian destruction of Israel in 722. Babylon captivity of Judah in 586. And Jesus, I'm guessing he was born in 4 BC or died in 4 BC. Not sure. But what do you guys think of that time period, and what's your time scale? What do you think?
Dan, is that based off of the genealogy? Is that where those numbers were coming from?
It says the Bible provides a reliable history of the universe and the events described in the Bible, particularly in the early chapters of Genesis, providing a framework through which we can interpret science and history. So, yes, I'm guessing it's going through this genealogy that we're talking about here to give the dates of when these things happened.
Right. Yeah. So I think that is interesting. And I would almost trust our known history more so based off of genealogy, more so than whatever numbers that they tell us based off of like carbon dating, because all of that kind of stuff seems to get a little wishy-washy and the numbers seem to change and everything's, it seems like they're pushing it like it's so old, right? That's been like since I was born, it's millions and millions of years old. But it does seem like we have more of this like genealogy that's telling us exactly how everything has happened since day one, which I find interesting. Um, so I don't know. It's never been like a super critical issue for me on like, was it 10,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago? But I do think our timeline has been manipulated, meaning the timeline that we've been given in the history, right? So I think it's warrants a conversation for sure, but I think I would lean more on the genealogy side of things if I had to pick. Joshua, did you have anything to add, or Morgan?
Well, no, actually not on this one.
Whoa.
I would say, yeah, I would definitely not believe. Well, okay, so you have to ask yourself, like, in the first place, why would they try to lie to you about, well, you gotta wonder why we had to start back over at zero and why carbon dating will go backwards at some point. Like, you have to ask yourself these questions first, but then you gotta wonder why anybody would try to manipulate the timeline, especially one that you currently live on. That's not that old. It wasn't manipulated that long ago. So there's a specific reason as to why, like, something as simple as that, what day of the week we're actually on and what year we're actually in is not real, or, being like we're being lied to. So, which opens up the question for so many other conspiracies that I just don't think that that's the most. And I think the more knowledge we get comes from actual text. Like I use the Bible as a text for everything because, like, as a reference source, because it can't be added to, and it's just a beautiful piece of alchemical living text. So I would probably lean towards more the genealogy side, but I will also add that it's extremely layered. So there is probably a lot of different elements in different chapters of different books that correlate to this, like the times 10 or times 70 or times 77 or like what have you, that will add years or something onto that probably.
Right. And just to add on to something else you were mentioned, Dan, or like, could they have developed that quickly? Right. Is that kind of what you were saying? Um, Based
Uh,
off of like the Tower of Babel not being that far after the creation story.
yeah, the flood happened in 2348. Then the Tower of Babel happened 2246. So 102
Right.
years
Hell yeah, I'd be
separate
building up too.
the time.
Think
Well,
about
they
it.
did it. They did it because of the flood.
I'd be building up.
Well,
Right.
you think
Think
about the
about all
flood
the
happened
information.
and there was only Noah and his family. So within 102 years, they were able to produce enough people to have a whole city.
But how long is 102 years? You don't
Well,
really
that's what I'm
know.
saying. Well, the
You don't
102
even know
years
what
is
day we're on.
by 102 years, like it says right here, because basically it's saying creation is only 7,000 years old based on what we know as a year right now.
Yeah, I would probably question the dates of like how long it was between the flood and the Tower of Babel. I think that's a good question and probably hard to nail exactly on. So I don't know how they were getting those numbers. Maybe it is through genealogy in the Bible. That would be something interesting to dive into. What I will say though is that because they were living so long, you got to imagine that they probably had a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge on how to do things. Think about how fast we've developed in the last 100 years, right? So if you had lived for like 500 years or longer, you probably had gained some tricks. You know what I mean? Maybe if you had a Shamir worm doing it for you.
Well, their bridge to knowledge was Noah. So if you think about Noetic archaeology, like by sound movement, maybe vibrations, different ways of building things as well because of things that they knew that we didn't.
Um,
Right.
so for me, this is one of the hardest things for me to accept out of the Bible is the 7,000 year timeline that humans have only been around for around 7,000 years. Actually, it's saying 4004 BC to now, so that's only 6,000 years. That's kind of the hardest for me to understand. It seems like we probably would have, based on the knowledge that we have, we would have been around a lot longer. And I don't think time is linear. I think it's cyclical. So it seems like a lot of these things would have happened over and over again. And I don't necessarily think that's just the hardest thing for me to grasp. Now, I understand that carbon dating, the way scientists date everything is probably doesn't work out very well. But it's just conceptually like only 7,000 years ago that humans were created. Because of
No.
like all the different varieties of humans that we have been able to find in the scientific record of Homo habilis and Gigantopithecus and all these other different ones. And I just find it hard to believe that it's only been that long. Personally, how I see it, I would think that humans have been around for probably around 250 to 500,000 years.
And what is that based off of? Why is it so hard to imagine it only being a shorter time instead of a longer time? One of the reasons I think that they are pushing the longer narrative is because if you are to have this sort of evolution, right, you kind of need that gap because we don't see it happening in front of our eyes, right? So that's a great way to make people think and believe in evolution. Is like
shit.
it took a long time. That's why we don't notice it.
So I don't necessarily believe in evolution and the
Right.
who's that guy?
Not saying
Who's
you
that?
do.
No,
Just
who's that
saying the
dude?
Darwin.
That's
Darwin. I don't
science.
necessarily believe in Darwinian evolution. I do believe in hybridization um and people
And that
getting
doesn't take
together that
long.
way. I think that evolution and creation could both be true. So like I was talking about before, I think last episode, where there was already people on the earth. God had created humans, but then he created Adam and Eve, which was supposed to be the perfected idea of a human, which is why they were placed in the garden. So I think there was already people wandering around. That's why Cain was able to find a wife. How would he have found a wife if there was no other people? So I think people had already been in existence before that, but the new creation, the second creation of this Adam and Eve, this perfected human person, maybe goes only back to 7,000 BC, and that's where they're tracing this lineage from. But I think humans and different types of humans have gone back way before that time. So maybe this is the time of cognizance or consciousness reality that we have existed in. But for life completely on Earth, I think it's been a lot longer than that.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, I don't think for me, it's not like a huge issue. That's why it's funny to me that that's like one of the hardest things for you to conceptualize on it. Cause for me, it's like
Yeah.
whether it was 1,000 years or 10,000 years ago, again, it gets to why are we asking the question, right? Which I'm glad you brought that up, Morgan. And so like
There it is.
if they did want to manipulate the timeline one way or another, which one kind of helps fit their narrative that they're trying to push is kind of how I look at
Well,
it and why I
Right.
lean more on the genealogy side.
Well, it's
I
like
could.
flat Earth or spherical Earth. It's who cares? It opened up an entire topic of, conversation, which opens up more topics, which has allowed us to sit here and have this current conversation right now.
Right.
I would say the same though to Matt, and that being like maybe that's just what they want you to believe. Maybe that's what the people that wrote the Bible want you to believe, so they could keep you in fear because we're babies and we don't have anything, so we have to listen to some higher authority.
Right. Yeah. You could totally flip it either way for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
humans do
I'm just
in
saying, like
theory.
7,000 years. Granted, it's somewhat long, but for all of these things to happen, a creation and a flood and the Tower of Babel and this lineage, it seems like to produce the amount of people for these civilizations to have existed in 3000 BC would have had to be enormous. I granted, like, people are fucking like rabbits because that's the first thing that they're instructed to do, but still, like, that's why it's just hard to. It's like when you tell people the Earth is 58 billion years old, they're like, "What? No way!" Right? I mean, it's the same. It's the same type of thing. It's just like, "What? That's too long," or "Oh, that's too short."
No,
Yeah.
I would definitely. It's a good question to ask because it's literally what we're ingrained to think. But if you think about it, like, what day are we even on? Like, when it goes, because everything in this book is also cyclical. Like, it folds into each other as well. and everything starts with those first 12 lines right there. And nowhere did he say that day 2 was good. Like, I'm still stuck on that. I don't know if you guys even like care. Like, once the firmament was made, he never said it was good.
But he said it was good after. So I think the point being, at least how I interpret it, is it all the parts were not put together yet. So it wasn't that the firmament wasn't good. It was just that it wasn't put in its right place yet. Like all the parts hadn't come together yet.
There's only
because then he does say, once everything is put together, he does say it's all good, right? Like it is good. So you could interpret it
it's all good.
There's only 3 legs on the table at that point. You needed to add the 4th leg for it to be good.
Well,
I got 3-legged tables and I love them. What are you talking about?
Rectangle tables?
No, it's
diamond ace.
It's like it's got rounded edges and it's only 3 legs.
3 legs.
I just don't like hard edges.
So maybe we're still being worked out, like in the where we are in the garden, just animated, or like tripping out on the fruit we ate. Like, oh shit, thank God we didn't really live that life. You know what I mean? Well, like, who knows?
That's why I asked about their ages also, because that age of how they are also plays a part in figuring out how long this is. So if they didn't actually live that long, would it be even shorter?
I don't know, because haven't you noticed that once they beget children, they start living way longer? It's like being a progenitor progenerates their lifespan too.
Right. Well, like what you're saying, Morgan, with time, like, how do we even know what time is? What time is it now? Like, how do we even know this is Friday or whatever? Well, we honestly, we don't know. So how did they know? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they had a different way of measuring time. We don't know, but we take it as factual as the time that we're in now. So we measure it by the year that we have, but maybe that's not how it was measured. So we're coming up with math that doesn't, that accumulates to 6,000 years, but that math is incorrect because we don't have a concept of what time actually is.
I do imagine that the day and night, the moon and the sun has always been a factor for essentially counting days. And I think the Hebrews have been pretty good about translating that, but that's not to be said that perhaps the spin rate could have changed, or you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think we've always kind of measured. Yeah, I think we've always kind of measured it the same, but perhaps the spin rate could be changing. But it does seem like they were living so long and having so many children. That's kind of how I see it. So when you have all these people living really long lives and having a lot of children throughout the time, it's easy to sort of multiply and get a lot done in a short amount of time. That's how I see it.
They were allowed to marry they were actually like allowed to be incest because the laws of Moses haven't come yet, like, so sisters, like, niece would marry niece would marry cousins would marry, like, that's how they were able to progenerate so quickly as well.
Yeah, perhaps I don't know if it ever like mentions that specifically. Maybe it does in other traditions, but it does mention that even here in the first verse in Genesis 5, this is an account of the births of Adam in the day of God's preparing man. In the likeness of God he hath made him, a male and a female he hath prepared them, and he blesseth them and calleth their name man. So really, I don't know. It's just, to me, it seems like this could also be just like this creation story of man, right? Like essentially it maybe isn't the 2 specific people, or these are the specific people referenced, maybe the first of a bunch of people that were created. I think there is potential for that theory in, it's not explicitly said, but essentially the fact that there were other people, because like we see, they were having children with other people that aren't mentioned. So perhaps it was a sister, or perhaps it was just part of the man that was created, right? They weren't family related, but they were the same species.
Oh, there
What do
is
you
a
guys think of
part
that theory?
that I read later. I was reading some other parts of the Bible, and it did mention that they were sleeping with their aunts and sisters and brothers and whatnot. There
That's how
was
the
some
bloodlines
incestual
stay
stuff
pure.
going on.
Right, that has happened in the Bible, but was that in? Are you saying in
That
Genesis
yeah,
or?
this because
Mhm.
this was even before Moses. So this is
Yeah.
why I'm just talking about through these 10 patriarchs and then the next 10 until Moses gets here. They are, yeah, they're swapping family members out at this point.
Well, I'll have to find those verses. I know there's
I
instances
mean,
where it's like there's no other choice and they get their father drunk to survive
Mhm.
their lineage. Like there's things like that, but I don't see
Yeah.
it in the early Genesis story of like, this is how it should be. This isn't part of the perfect
they
design,
didn't say
if that makes
that,
sense.
but
Yeah.
I mean, that's how, I mean, what is said is like they had a like their pristine gene pool, like, or that's what they called it, or like that's what it was called, their bloodline. That's why it stayed so pure throughout that time period, because they didn't have the 10 commandments yet, and they just were fruitful and multiplied, like they were told to do. So I mean, to them back then, that wasn't really a thing, I don't think. And I
Well,
think
it's
that's another reason why it's mimicked and mocked today, and why people try to do the intermarrying stuff today to keep their bloodline pure or what have you, because I mean, that's kind
when
of what
who's known for
they,
doing that? Sort of
I'm
the lizard people. That's what they
I'm
always say, right?
The
Like
elites, right?
the royal family, the elites, right? They're always
Yeah.
concerned with keeping the royal blood. And so where does that trace back to? We get stories of Vlad the Impaler, just these stories of like perhaps there was a bloodline that was concerned with doing things that way. I don't know if that was necessarily the way God intended it, though, is my point.
Not
Because
to
well,
we
be
that's
don't.
what
usually the
Adam means.
bloodline's kind of concerned with the Adam lineage,
It is, because Adam means blood.
doesn't
Yeah,
Well,
it's
they would have come from Adam, but it could have been like, I guess where do we get the serpent seed? That's kind of what it gets
well,
back to,
there's
right? That's what I was
two,
wondering.
so because
it?
there's two different sets of patriarchs. So the once it goes from Adam to Seth, because Seth was chosen, and it goes to so then Noah becomes like the bridge of like what have you, but it goes Noah, Shem, Arpachshad, Salas, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serug, Naor, Terah, Abraham. And then you get concerned with the bloodline of Abraham, because that's where Jesus comes from. So there's two different bloodlines, Abraham and Adam.
No, so they're not, are you saying they're not from the same bloodline? Or what do you mean by that?
I don't think that Adam and Abraham are. No, I could be wrong about
Well,
that.
well, Abraham would be very of mixed blood, because Noah took his wife that was Cain's wife, right?
Right.
Uh,
Well, it all gets back to are we saying that Adam and Eve are the only source, or there were other people, right, like, involved? Because otherwise, everyone goes
No,
back to Adam,
yeah,
right?
I'm talking about Genesis chapter 5. Yeah, the genealogy and why like it's important to know, and then how like and then the basically like the patriarchs and how they were established.
yeah. To me, the bloodline is important because
Bloodlines.
they're saving that bloodline because it comes from God.
They think it's important enough to always be written down and important enough
I
to
think
reveal to us at the very beginning of Genesis.
there's probably a Cain bloodline and a Seth bloodline, and those were the two different bloodlines. And so maybe you could say that maybe some of the elites are coming from the Cain bloodline, but also there's a preservation
Well, then there's three.
of the Seth bloodline.
Yeah. The whole bloodline conversation is very interesting for sure.
And it's only because Adam means blood, literally. It's like another name for it.
I never heard that, but
Well, you can look it up.
yeah, perhaps I will just look it up. I'm not
Y'all
busy
go right ahead.
I thought it was from the Hebrew word Adama, which means soil or ground.
There you go.
It does. It means red. There's a net. So like after this happened, there's a natural word for Adam, and then there's a spiritual word for Adam. And it translates to red dirt, but then everybody, gains a spiritual name after that. And let's see, I got a couple of them. So Adam, because he came from that clay, iron dirt, he got blood, so he became a man. Seth means appointed. Enosh means mortal. Canaan means sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing. And Noah means comfort or rest.
Respite, right?
I think of sound, but I'm weird.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. What I wanted to bring up was also, yes, last episode we talked about the Cain bloodline, and then in chapter 5 we're talking about Seth bloodline, and there is some interesting connections with the names, Methuselah and then Methuselah, and then there's also an Enoch on both sides. And so my thought was, what if there is no Seth? There is only Cain. And Cain killed his brother, and then he asked for like redemption, retribution, whatever, however you have it, and then he became good. And then so
like Hercules.
Maybe this is like a shadow self and light self of the same person. And that's why a lot of the names are very similar. It's just a mere flip of shadow self and light self.
So what's the flip of Jared?
I know, I love how these names are all complicated, and then it's just, and Methuselah had Jared or whatever it is.
Jared.
Yeah. I know. Because Enos is similar to Enoch also, but mostly I'm referring to Mahalalel and Methuselah. Actually, this is in chapter 5. So go back to chapter 4 and look at the names in chapter 4.
Yeah, personally, I think that there was just a lot of the same names that were used and carried down, and just sort of slight variations of the names. We still do that today, right? We'll like name our kids after our parents or grandparents or after their middle name, or we'll use a slight name that's somewhat similar. So that's kind of what I think was going on. But we do tend to see these sort of doppelgangers in reality, right? Or like, Bizarro Superman. It's like his like looks like him, but it's like totally different. We do seem to see that sort of characteristic in life, which I find interesting.
Or like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Well, I bring that
Uh,
up also because a lot of people, um, I've heard a theory too that Jesus had a brother and he was the one that was actually sacrificed and Jesus lived. I think there's
That's nuts.
another story where there was like a Barnabas who was a prisoner and they sacrificed him for Jesus instead of sacrificing Jesus. So
right. So
there's several different stories like that, and it goes into that twin mythology of a higher self and a lower self. And so that's what I was kind of bringing to this is maybe Cain and Seth. Maybe Cain is the lower self and Seth is the higher self, and they're actually the same. And that's why some of their lineage seems to be kind of a match.
yeah, I
But I
think it
could be
was
wrong, and I'm
Barabbas.
probably in wrong. But I'm just bringing that to the table.
No, it's a
Yeah, no,
it's a really good point to make because some people even say that in a lot of different, cults and mystic cults and a bunch of different things that people still follow today say that that Christ is the demiurge, that it's the same God that like they're the same, that, on
Yeah,
both sides of the coin. So it's a good point that you did bring that up.
yeah. To me, it's like the
'Cause that's
light
what some
self and the
people
dark
do
self.
think. And that's how it's been brought to like common like consciousness is in the form of light and dark self. But I do have in my notes that um Enosh, which means mortal, is Seth's son. So Seth did have Enosh was Seth's son. Um, and that came from the Torah, I think.
That's in here in chapter 5.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't have anything else to add about any of that. I think I covered everything that I wanted to talk about. Joshua,
Oh,
did you
well,
have anything else to say, or did you want to get into St. Patrick real quick before we jump out of here?
Um, I think the genealogies are important in some ways because of the fact that there's probably a lot of codes hidden in there. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, each names meant something different and it kind of told a story in of itself. So I'd say there's a lot there to unpack. But yeah, I would like to kind of talk about the St. Patrick stuff. I keep going in and out of, I keep falling asleep. So sometimes when you guys ask me a question, I'm like, not really sure what we're talking about. So yeah, sorry.
Very good. Yeah, it's like there for you. Good
we
night,
hadn't reached
man.
out to you at all. What was that?
Oh, Morgan's gonna go.
All right.
yeah, me go.
She's
Good night,
done.
Morgan.
I did
Good night.
want to add, yeah, I did want to add that Enosh was the first to invoke the name of Yahweh, and that's in Genesis 4:26. Like,
Interesting.
yeah. So
Praise God.
Being ENOS.
E well, in the Torah it's spelled Enosh, I think.
Okay. I wonder, is that Enos as we see it here?
Yeah, it's the same
ENOS.
one. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
See,
Good
even
to
that
know.
is
I thought Moses was the
okay.
first one to talk about Yahweh.
According to Genesis 4:26, Enosh was the first one
To acknowledge the name of the
Yeah.
Lord or to
to
acknowledge the name of
invoke
Yahweh?
the name of Yahweh.
Okay.
Was it Yahweh or Jehovah?
No, it specifically said Yahweh.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so what it says in Genesis 4:26 in the Young Literal Translation is, And to Seth, to him also a son hath been born, and he calleth his name Enos. Then a beginning was made of preaching in the name of Jehovah. So yeah, that'd be interesting to dive into to see what specific terms are being used there. Because normally God is used as I think Elohim in mine, and then
Yeah.
perhaps Jehovah and Yahweh are interchangeable from this translation to the Torah.
Well, another point to make is that he sometimes reveals himself by different names to each of the patriarchs. Like he goes by a certain name when he's dealing with Jacob. He goes by a different name when he's dealing with Abraham, et cetera, et cetera. So for whatever reason, there, sometimes that's the case.
Which again makes me wonder, like, were these other entities that were just being described as Lord because of the certain territory that they were encountering?
Oh, well, I guess there's that possibility. But I think what it is as well is that, like he does something. For instance, like if he's merciful and spares Noah, well, then maybe when he reveals himself to Noah, he uses a name that means mercy or something. You know what I mean?
It's a different part of the fruit of the same fruit. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
An aspect of his personality.
Right.
Oh yeah, it does say Enosh, Enosh. And this man was the first to invoke the name of Yahweh.
So that would be essentially the tetragrammaton, YHWH.
Yeah.
Which really
if you want to get into Enoch, that's a whole different 5 hours we could do. It's nuts.
Yeah, we probably should do a breakdown on Enoch.
Typically there are no vowels in Hebrew, so I think that's where some of the variations come from too, is that we're just trying to fill in the vowels between the consonants, which I think is an interesting thing, because when you get married, you give vowels. And I kind of think that because of the marriage aspect that is a lot of times present with Yahweh, it's like we're filling in our vowels. And it's, I don't know how to.
We are, because
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
What you say comes back to you in this lifetime, even, you do fulfill your vowels, because literally the power of speech and what you say will come back to you. It's just how it works.
Well, if Yahweh is the vowels, because those were the higher letters, because they only use consonants, and then the vowels as a vowel. So then when you're married with God. So then you get to put those vowels in, because now you have
right. Because L in Hebrew is translated to God. So vow to L, right? That's kind of like vowel.
Oh, good catch, man.
Yeah. Okay. Good night, you guys.
Good night,
Morgan. Peace.
Good night, man. Yeah, let's get into St. Patrick real quick. Joshua, what you got?
Fell asleep.
Yeah, I think so.
that green beer kicking in.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you ask me.
Let's get into St. Patrick real quick.
Yes,
you said you wanted to bring.
It's rumored that he chased the snakes off the island, but I think it might be kind of like a subtle reference to the maybe the serpent seed, running the ruling class out of Ireland or something like that, maybe. So I was just, I'd really like to get this for a minute.
Me and Roman did a chat GPT, and we're talking to St. Patrick on chat GPT, and we wanted it to answer as St. Patrick. And so we went through a whole bunch of different questions. I can't remember.
That's really interesting.
But one of the things that it did say was that the Druids had holy whales and holy buildings in Ireland, and St. Patrick would go to those and then just christen them in the name of God and bless them, and then they became sacred sites for whatever you want to, Christianity, Catholicism, whatever it was. They would become sacred sites under that god now instead of the Druidic gods. So
Yeah, I think it was a spiritual thing, in my opinion. He used a bell, right, to sort of ward off the spirits. That's another part of the legend.
Oh,
And what better way of sort of, he also fasted for like 40 days, right? And so I think he was able to see sort of the spiritual realm after doing that, and then use the bells to probably like ward off these entities. And having seen that I have encountered these entities, these serpent entities, I think they do exist. And so we haven't seen any evidence of physical snakes ever being on Ireland. And so I do think that the story, there is truth to it, but I think it was more on the spiritual side of things. A lot of people try to say that it was like a genocide. I haven't found a ton of evidence for that. Maybe it was, but I think he was actually literally warding off entities that were probably being summoned by the people of Ireland.
It was spiritual genocide. He converted everybody somehow, which is interesting because he seemingly was by himself, or maybe with only a few other saints or priests or whatever you want to call it. So it doesn't seem like he would have been able to defend himself in a fighting type of way. So it seems like he just went there and just started blessing everything and getting people to follow with him, which
right
doesn't necessarily mean he chased the snakes out or there was a genocide. It just means I think that he was able to convert them into the new religion rather than keep it, because there is a Celtic goddess named Brittany. Her name was something similar, but she ended up becoming sanctified because the people didn't want to give her up, so they just made her a saint. So she doesn't even have anything to do with Catholicism or Christianity. She was actually a pagan goddess, and so he just blessed her and made her a saint, and then people followed after that because they love their goddess so much.
That's an interesting story. Have you guys heard the story of St. Patrick and driving out the serpent goddess Cora?
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not familiar with this either.
You mind if I just read this quick story?
Yeah, this might actually be where I'm thinking of comes from, perhaps.
So Cora, the great serpent goddess of Ireland and Scotland, whose name is almost forgotten today, called forth the serpents of life, death, and rebirth to twine the magic of eternity around the lives of our ancestors. The story goes that St. Patrick kills her and drives the snakes from Ireland. Since there were no snakes in Ireland, this story is most certainly mythopoetic, one which illustrates how Christianity drove out old religion, the Druids, and the worship of Cora. In the story, St. Patrick chases Cora all across Ireland to the final battle of Lough Derg. When Cora faced down St. Patrick at Lough Derg, she swallowed him whole. As Mircea Eliade noted in Rites and Symbols of Initiation, being swallowed by the snake can be seen as return to the womb and a complete regeneration of the initiate through its gestation and birth by the Great Mother. But St. Patrick was not an initiate seeking rebirth through the mother's womb. No, he was intent on stamping out the influence of the serpent goddess and her promise of regeneration and unity, concepts directly opposed by the new Christian church's doctrine of duality, sin, and salvation through Christ. St. Patrick passed 2 days and 2 nights within Cora's body, eventually cutting his way out and killing her in the process. So this is just one story that I found, online, but it is an interesting story. And I do think if you were to fast 40 days, I think you would be able to tap into this other spiritual realm. And perhaps he was having this sort of astral experience, right? And it was documented and put into lore. So that's just kind of a fun story that I found last year when doing some research that I thought was relevant. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when we were talking to Chat GPT, it brought up this story too. And then we asked it from the position of Merlin also. And then so basically it was kind of just saying that both were actually myth and not actually based on any actual evidence. There's some papers of St. Patrick that was supposed to be like a diary or a dialogue, but there's no proof that he actually wrote them. They could have been written by anybody. So basically, they're saying that Chat GPT was saying that the story of St. Patrick could have been a mythologicalized version of Christianity coming to Ireland and not necessarily St. Patrick himself.
Yeah, so I don't know. I tend to think that he probably did exist, and yeah, you could probably argue it both ways. But I do think it's interesting that the stories we get are of him like going around and blessing things. It seemed like it was less about like crusading and stuff, but trying to just show like goodness. And I don't know, he gets a bad rep. So I like to just look at things with a fine comb and try to gather, what I can from him. I had also had this prayer of St. Patrick, which I thought was interesting, but again, it's a lot of just like positivities and like protection. So yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think St. Patrick was a good guy or a bad guy or didn't exist at all if you had to choose?
I think he probably did exist. Now he's not in the Bible, so I wouldn't
This would have
like.
been a lot after that, right?
Yeah, obviously. So I mean, I like don't crusade about it, but I think he's kind of like a part of Christian mythology, if you will, like the non-canonical legends and myths that seem to pervade through Christianity. So he could fall into that category because, after all, the Catholic Church did kind of mythologicalize. I don't even know if that's the proper word. Mythologize, rather, some of these characters, I think, to be larger than life, or their various miracles or whatever. If you read in the
Right.
prologue of Orid, there's like a saint for every single day, and so on and so forth. So I think sometimes they were kind of, you know, um, meant to illustrate like things. So they might have used a little bit of hyperbole at times to like add emphasis to aspects of their personality or something like that. So yeah, I'm sure there's a little bit of fluff in the story, probably. But I do think he probably did exist. Now, as far as the snake thing's concerned, like again, I wondered if maybe at the time, I mean, after all, look at all the censorship that we have to put up with right now. So perhaps this is like a euphemism. I wonder if maybe they chased out the ruling class or the blue bloods, or maybe the seed of Cain, or so I don't know. I was just curious about that too. If maybe it was like kind of like when it describes how when the kingdom of God will fill the earth and the principalities will basically be pushed into the sea and so on and so forth. So I kind of have that kind of imagery in my mind, like that is going to kind of mimic what the story of St. Patrick was in Ireland, except we'll see that on the whole earth. Now, I don't know if that'll just mean like literally the snakes get chased into the sea, but like the ruling classes will lose their authority. The bounds of the kingdom of God will extend into the seas. Like there won't be any home for them. They won't have any more dominion or authority. So whether it's actual snakes or if it's like the archonic rulers, I think there's just an element there that's perhaps not well understood, but was there because it's like, well, we can't criticize them openly. We have to kind of do it subtly by referring to them as snakes or whatever.
Yeah, I think he had a process, and I think I found some document on it last year. I'll have to try to dig it up again, but it was like he had this process for getting rid of these serpent entities, and it involved like fasting, and like praying and things like that. And so I kind of think that there was something to it. Again, like I think there are these serpentine beings. Maybe some are good, some are bad, but it seemed like they were worshiping them, and they had a control on the culture. And I think he figured out a way of sort of cleansing those entities. If they were being parasitic, that's perhaps why he was revered and celebrated still to this day. Because if there was this parasitic grasp on society and it was removed, that would have been palpable, right? That would have been felt, and we're perhaps still seeing the effects of that. And if there are these serpent archon energies that are being parasitic to people, what a better way of hiding that knowledge than not only demonizing St. Patrick, but also commercializing the celebration of that, right? So like turning it into idolizing him, and then also making it about like, drinking and just partying and things like that, instead of like fasting and praying, which was what his whole thing was, right?
And another thing, that picture there with Moses and the brazen serpent, that looks a lot like the World Health Organization symbol, by the way. But when they were in the desert, I seem to recall that there were a lot of serpents that were winged that were being sent after the people and plaguing them and such. And
were they winged or fiery?
I think both, actually.
Okay.
And so they were being stung or poisoned or something by these serpent creatures, and that raising the brazen serpent up on the pole was the way to cure them or save them. So I almost see a parallel there too. I'm glad you had that picture there. I see a little bit of a parallel there too with the way Moses was handling that. Maybe St. Patrick, was doing something similar. So that was just a thought that I wanted to include. Oh, and during an eclipse, there are what they call shadow bands that occur just before and just after an eclipse. And those look like snakes rippling across the ground. You can see it with solid colors, more especially. It's kind of easy to miss, though, because most people are looking at the eclipse and not the ground. So most people would probably miss the shadow bands themselves. But anyway, I think that's an interesting thing to mention.
Yeah, it's interesting that we also call that in the censorship world, right? When someone's shadow banned, they're like secretly hidden.
Yeah. That's funny.
Those darn AI serpents. What do you think, Dan? I got to get out of here soon, but this has been a super fun chat.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, I think St. Patrick is kind of mythologized to just represent the church patriarchy taking over the matriarchy in Ireland because they did worship a goddess. That's why they sanctified her in the first place. And so it's talking about bringing the patriarchy to Ireland and chasing out the serpents, which was the female energy.
And there's in the Kundalini aspects, there's the Ida and the Pingala. There is like a female serpent and a male one. So you could almost look at Patrick as like the male version and hers maybe the female version in a way too, just from like the Hindu perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So do you think that the serpent entities that were around, or do you even think they were entities, or do you just literally think there was a matriarch of like female leaders that liked serpents, or what? How are you looking at that?
Well, even through Eve, right? The context of her being seduced by the serpent. I think in Christianity and Catholicism, they have this attribution towards women as being close to serpent energy because of the relationship of the serpent in the garden and Eve being seduced by that. And so they look at females as being seduced by the serpent and being of evil, which is why there's a patriarchy. And it's not a patriarchy and matriarchy together anymore. Because I think in a lot of aspects, the king and the queen were both highly ranked in pagan belief systems. They were equals. They weren't. It wasn't one was above the other. They both ruled together. You see that a lot too in Egypt, even. So I think like they just associated with this female aspect, serpent energy. And so by getting rid of the goddesses, which were pretty high on the pagan worship list, they were able to chase the snakes out. It's kind of the same with the Templars and how the Templars worshipped Mary, I believe, or a female deity. I mean, tribe of Dan, so you could even say it was Danu or Isis or Ishtar or whatever, when you want to call it. They killed the Templars purposely on Friday the 13th, because Friday is Frey Day, which is the goddess, and then the 13th is the letter M, which is mother, matriarchy, mater, all those different things. And they purposely did that to send out a symbol not to worship any female deities. And so I think it's just more the same thing. They didn't want them to worship females. They wanted to worship males.
Right. So do you think that, I mean, for me, it's less important on like, is it a male or female deity, but like the fruit of that deity. And
you don't
so
think it's important? I think it's highly important because look at the patriarchy that it's become and this oppression of women in society because they're not good enough or able to even fucking talk to God. To me, that's baloney, man.
But that's not really true though either, because Mary was a priestess in Yahweh's temple and she bore Christ. So I hear that a lot about how Christianity puts women down, but quite the contrary. I think in some cases, it's not women that it's putting down; it's goddess worship, perhaps, if anything. I mean, but that can be conflated kind of easily. I just wanted to make that point about Mary, though.
Yeah, I think it also has to do with sexuality and seduction, and them not being tempted by women. That's kind of what I
agree with.
That's why they make in the Arab countries, they make the women wear the whatever it's called,
the hijab.
The hijab, yeah, because they don't want to be seduced by their gait, by the way they look. So they put that on. So
that tradition also comes from the fallen angels taking human wives, and the kippah, or the little cap that the Jewish men wear on their head as well, the yarmulke, I think sometimes they call that. That's to guard your crown. So not just do the women wear headscarves, but the men also cover up their crown. And I think that kind of a reference to that sort of thing as well.
I heard that
not just women, but men have to worry about it too, apparently, because there's even a story with Lot about how when the angels came to talk to Lot, the men of the town wanted to sleep with the angels, and he even tried to offer up his own daughters to them, and they didn't want that. That was too boring for them. They needed spice, right?
Yeah.
Or something. I don't know.
Animals like to chase their prey.
Oh, and this might relate back. This thing on the screen, by the way, this could even relate back to Simon Magnus, because it did mention how he had formed his own Gnostic sect. And this, of course, this is very much Gnostic.
Yeah.
So there could be a possible connection there as well.
But
Yeah, real quick, just to reiterate, Dan, what I was saying, I don't think it's important so much to look at like, is this character a man or a female, but more so on like, what is the fruit that they're bearing? Like, what are the actions, the energy that they're putting out? So again, I'm saying that we shouldn't have these patriarchs or monarchs, you know what I mean? Like, I think it should just be everybody working together. And like Christianity does get that bad rep, but like even Jesus, the first people he sent out to go tell the good news were females, and yet the Bible, people try to say that the Bible says that females shouldn't be telling people about Jesus, and it's like, what? That was like the first thing he did when he was resurrected.
Yeah, do you think females should be able to lead mass?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on if females shouldn't be able to do or do anything. Like, that's not up for me to decide, in my opinion.
Well, I would push back on that just a little bit, because there was no female disciples, even though Mary Magdalene is sometimes remembered as being a 13th disciple. I think that there were still a lot of strong women like Ruth and Judith and even Mary. But so I don't necessarily have any problem with them doing God's work, so to speak. But that particular role, though, as priest, it talks about that in Exodus, how the firstlings of the flock, the males from each matrix, it actually uses that word matrix, which I think is referring to the hymen or the vagina. So the first male that comes from that would be the Lord's, it says. So I think this is where we kind of see that age-old thing about the birthright, and Cain and Abel perhaps even is a reference to this, or Jacob and Esau, where the firstborn gets that particular blessing because God said, well, this one's mine, but that's never said about women. It's just the male. So I think that specific duty of preaching and stuff, because also the women are involved in apostolic succession, which is the transferring of this Holy Spirit thing. So, I would like to say yes, I agree, but actually I don't. So I'm not trying to be contrary, but at the same time, no. I wouldn't be able to provide evidence for it.
So Joshua, how do you take it then when Jesus, because that was like the first thing he did, right? When he was resurrected, is he told, was it Mary,
they were
to go and tell people about what had happened, right? Or Mary, and something like that.
Yeah.
So how do you take that?
But that's sharing the good news, yeah. But
well, that's what it is, isn't it? Isn't that the whole point?
Well, maybe not. I mean, there's differences too, like between apostles and disciples and teachers. I mean, there's gifts of the Spirit, so to speak, that maybe. I mean, that's actually a good topic to dissect. So I'll research on it. But I just think that there's something about the mantle of leadership, in a sense, that it even goes back to like Adam and Eve. Like Eve was made to be subservient to Adam. I mean, she wasn't his equal. And so I don't know. I mean, I'll get, when I'm not like half zonked.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll try to do the topic some justice and come back. But I just wanted to be the contrarian there and push back a little.
But no, that's fits into what I'm saying, though, because that's why they got rid of the goddesses in the first place, is because of this aspect of them relating to the serpent, just like Eve being seduced by the serpent, just like you were talking about the fallen angels, or the reason why they covered them with a hijab is because of the fallen angels. So it has all that serpent motif right there, and all of that symbology. You have that same concept. So that's what I'm saying. I think that when he went there, he got rid of the the women or the goddess, the worship of the goddess, and replaced it. And that's why he blessed all of these places that were sacred Druid places as well, Wales and temples and places like that. He blessed them and turned them over to be about God and Yahweh instead of the pagan deities that they worshiped there at those places. But when you look at it from the perspective of the Irish and the Druids, these were also sacred places to them. It wasn't like places that they like slaughtered people or did anything bad. These were places of high value to them, that they did their own type of worship there too. So I feel like it might not have been genocide, but it was definitely a spiritual genocide because they got rid of the pagans' beliefs and replaced it with their own.
Well, so is that like a genocide though, if people are wanting it? I guess, and that's maybe the question, and we don't know because
But
we
I
weren't
don't think
there,
that,
right? But
yeah, I don't think that they necessarily wanted it. They were conned or seduced into believing so by being preached to, by being told that their gods are bad and that only Yahweh is the true God. And I'm going to show you why he's the true God, and convincing them to leave their gods. Even though they didn't fully convince them, they changed their goddess, their main goddess, into a saint.
Well,
I just
and
think if they would have been not so receptive, like that's why would they be so receptive to it, or why don't we see any evidence of like coercion? It seems more like it was just he was doing something that perhaps the people wanted, because I don't see a lot of conflict, and maybe that was hidden up, who knows? But that's kind of
I
where my
think
mind
maybe
goes.
Ireland was the possibly like one of the last bastions, the last places that they journeyed to try to change people, to switch people over. Because look at what was going on. I mean, what do you guys know what time period St. Patrick was said to have been in Ireland?
Yeah, it was like 5th century.
Oh, 5th century. So
Yeah,
pretty
since
early.
it is believed that St. Patrick's death was March 17th, 461 AD.
So that's pretty early before Christianity had really even made it across Europe. So that's kind of interesting because it wasn't until like the 900s or thousands that, the Vikings were trying to stop the persecution of the pagan belief system. So they were doing it. They did that 500 years before that. I don't know. I kind of find that hard to believe.
one other thing I would say, and I'm not trying to hate on women or anything, but I think one of the reasons too for the topic we were talking about earlier is that sometimes maybe the women lack discernment in certain spiritual matters. Like for instance, Eve, the serpent never tried to trick Adam. He only ever preyed on Eve. Because even when you read the book of Adam and Eve, he tricks her another time or two. They go into a river to try and like cleanse themselves of sin. Even though they weren't told to do this, they were just trying to think up ways to like show God that they were really trying to repent or that they were sorry or whatever. And even in that instance, Adam's like, don't move, just stay in the water. Well, then an angel, which is Satan, of course, appears and tells Eve, hey, you're good. You've accomplished it. God told me to come and tell you that he's pleased with what you've done. And she gets out of the water and believes him and everything. And then comes to Adam and was like, hey, an angel came and talked to me and told me that everything's okay. And he's like, I told you not to get out of the water. And then realizes that she was tricked yet again. So I understand that maybe the book of Adam and Eve is not canonical, of course, but it's just interesting to me that when Satan attacks Adam and Eve, he attacks Eve. He attacks Adam through Eve, actually. And, generally too, like the holidays that we practice today, typically it's like the woman that wants to do the worldly type holidays, and like preserve the pagan ways and stuff like that she might have been raised with. So I sometimes wonder, again, not trying to put women down. I'm just saying, like, it's just a fact, I guess, that maybe there's something there to deal with, that somehow if a woman was a pastor, that maybe, I don't know, that lack of spiritual discernment could affect her being a pastor. That's all I'm trying to say. Now, that said, there's a lot of terrible men pastors. I'm fully aware of that. But again, if you could say that a woman could lead the church, then she could just as well lead the family. And of course, that's not the model that was set up. So that's, I guess, where I kind of would rest my case for now. But I'll try to, again, study on that topic.
What about a female president?
Well, that could very well be the whore of Babylon that we're waiting on. So, I guess my point will get proven soon
a woman
enough.
becomes president and she's the whore of Babylon. See, that's all that I'm trying to say right there. Is it has to, I think the snake idea, serpent idea, has to do with this Eve idea. And when the Christians and Catholics came to Ireland, St. Patrick, they got rid of this worship of the goddess and replace it with a patriarchal man, and that's why he chased the snakes out. That's what the mythology is. That's what the ounce of truth in the whole story is.
And I just think it was actual entities that he was chasing out, and not so much just based on a like monarch or getting rid of women. I think it was more about these actual serpentine entities. That's my opinion.
And they wouldn't have fought back. And so it's easier to believe that there were serpent entities that he just converted people into a patriarchy and got rid of the female worship.
Yeah, I think he actually got rid of serpent entities, and people saw what he was doing and how he operated, and they liked it. That's my opinion, just based off of research and personal experiences.
That's fair. Okay.
Well, the entities could have been influencing the religious aspects too. Like, I mean, it could have all been one and the same kind of connected thing, because a lot of times the Anunnaki types, whatever we want to call them, angels or whatever, they would kind of set themselves up as gods or goddesses. And in a lot of cases, they were associated with animals of different sorts, like different kingdoms. Mm-hmm. So in this particular case, this Korah could have been associated with serpents, but could have been in herself like a Fomorian or a giant or Anunnaki type. But anyway,
I think too, like the Celtic knots and whatnot are kind of serpentine in a way. How it's tied in knots. It's very serpent-like, and so I think maybe Ireland itself was just kind of associated with that kind of serpent symbolism. So that's kind of another aspect.
Nomad, could you pray in closing and chase the serpents out for us?
I'll leave right now.
Yeah, I'd love to. Are you guys ready?
Yeah,
sure. Thank you.
Lord of all creation, thank you so much for bringing us together, allowing us to fellowship. I pray that you continue to draw us all closer to each other and to others as we draw closer to you. Lord, we pray for discernment and protection. And Lord, please help us to continue to move out about our day and be good examples of your love. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks for hosting, Dan. And if you didn't get to see that Simpsons clip I dropped in the Telegram, you might want to watch it on Whacking Day. I felt like it kind of paralleled this pretty well.
All right. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Farewell, guys. Thank you.
Love y'all. Peace.
Thanks. Bye.
I'm regenerating, raising my vibration. Curses ending with my generation. Blessings raining, it's a celebration. Go and tell the nation, we're all saved by grace. And I know I ain't boasting, I've been stuck in my ways, man. I'm regenerating, raising my vibration. Curses ending with my generation. Blessings raining, it's a celebration. Go and tell the nation, we're all saved by grace. And I know I ain't boasting, I've been stuck in my ways, man. I've been stuck in my ways. How many days before it's no longer a phase? God keep giving me grace. I'm giving him thanks, I'm giving him praise. Giving him thanks, I'm giving him praise. I've been stuck in my ways. How many days before it's no longer a phase? God giving me grace. I'm giving him praise, giving him thanks. Giving him praise, I'm giving him thanks. I've been stuck in my ways. How many days before it's no longer a phase? God giving me grace. I'm giving him praise, giving him thanks. Giving him praise, I'm giving him thanks.